We'd like to welcome you out to the May 20th, 2020 Commission meeting. If you'd all stand and join us with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item on our agenda is the approval of minutes.
I don't have any corrections that I've noted.
I didn't either. I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Item number 2 is discussion and possible approval of designated paintball area at the Carbon County Fairgrounds. Megan, did you want to address that?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. If you would just, for the record, just state your name.
Oh, yes, of course. Megan Marshall, and this is Clinton Broadhead behind me.
Thanks.
I sent over a copy of our proposal earlier today. I don't know if you guys got a copy of that already, but
Yeah.
we've been working closely with your office as well as Carbon Rec to find a good spot to cordon off for a public paintball field. It would be very minimal cost. The only thing we're asking from the county is some signage that we can put up on the structure that's there. In the proposal, it shows where we're looking at, what's going to be ideal. There's a grassy area with some dirt terrain off to the side for future expansion, but it's close enough that it's good for parking. It's still in the middle of a lot of the activities that are going on up there, but far enough away that nobody's gonna get hit with ricochet or anything like that. But just an open space for the public to come and play. Nothing with requiring reservations, not asking for any employees to help out with that. Just if you'll allow us to put some donated obstacles and bunkers there that we can play around and use that structure that's already there. We can get that cleaned out and use that as kind of a staging area. It's the perfect spot to do it in. But it would just be a great place to add another activity to that amazing place up there. It's active, it's fun, great for kids, for adults. They'd have to bring their own equipment, of course, but the county wouldn't be liable for any accidents. So we're gonna have lots of signage saying play at your own risk, but it's gonna be a lot of fun. We've got a lot of community support, a lot of people in the area that are anxious to play with each other. So I think it could be great if you guys would approve it.
How do you figure the county couldn't be liable? Is it not on county property?
It is on county property, but it would be just like any other public space. If somebody were to go take the liberty to go play on the softball fields, or they would be out on the dirt track practicing, the county wouldn't be liable because it's not a county supported activity. It's just a public space.
An area where it can be done.
Exactly.
Okay. The only question I have is I've never been around paintball equipment, but from the area that you propose to use as the site, how far would a paintball reach if they shot towards the event center? Would it reach that far?
If the individual has their marker or paintball gun turned up too high, it could potentially hit the building, yes.
Okay.
But in the proposal, we have it listed as 270 feet per second, which will limit it to about 400 feet at best. And that's even just intentionally trying to shoot it that far. So there's always that potential, yes,
Yeah,
but
that's
not guaranteed.
my only question and worry over it is how easy is it to clean up if that
Very.
event center ends up
Yeah.
getting
Sure.
shot?
Paintballs, everything nowadays is pretty much biodegradable, and
Water
if you
soluble.
didn't clean it yourself, it would naturally rinse off within like a year on its
Okay.
own.
But that would be part of the guidelines on some of the signage that I'd want to put on the structure out there, is that they would have to adjust their paintball guns to be at that level.
Yeah.
I guess what are you thinking that the grass area would be the best place to set your obstacle course up rather than a little further east, just in the dirt?
So the areas that we went out and looked at, we spoke with Scott out there as well. That's kind of the best area that's already sectioned off that wouldn't need any maintenance, so to speak. There are other spots that are a bit further away from structures, but then that would require dozing over property and leveling out more or less.
A lot more site preparation, whereas this one is ready to go.
So would it be something where you contemplate that you could schedule the area all for yourself, or would it become first come, first serve?
First come, first serve. We didn't want to burden the county with having to set aside employee resources, making reservations, and all that complicated. So on the signage as well, it would state that reservations aren't allowed. It's a first come, first serve basis, but paintball is really, it's a team activity. It's a group activity. The more the merrier. And so if you do get two groups that show up on a weekend, that's great. They'll all be thrilled, in all honesty.
So one thing about the area that you guys are considering is, I think we've spoke, that grass is going to be eventually moved out. We are no longer going to be watering or maintaining or mowing or anything in that area. It's just been an added expense that we don't really get that much benefit from.
Sure.
So, and same with the structure, that building, you guys want to utilize that, but to me, it needs to be addressed first. There's some hazards in there just from walking around, tripping hazards, and things that need to be cleaned up too. So,
Sure.
And it was kind of my understanding, and maybe an error on my part, that this was not going to be like a 24/7 paintball area. It was just going to be for events that you guys were going to hold from time to time.
Oh,
And-
I apologize for the misunderstanding. No, coordinating it off just like I say, the softball fields. It would be an area that's designated for paintball. And we would have the obstacles set up there all the time, and people can come and go as they please.
Okay, and so with that being in mind, I think we possibly need to look at a different area
Okay.
because we have plans to kind of just take that out. And if we have obstacles in the way, did you guys look at the south of the motocross track? Does that area work where the king crawlers were? And
So that goes with what we just discussed. That would require preparation, flattening out the land, which would cost resources to the community. That's what we're kind of trying to prevent.
Do you have to have a flat area?
It depends on your type of field setup. My personal opinion, to get people more interested in it, aside from the ones that are, a flat terrain would be better just because it's less effort
Yeah.
to play.
There are several individuals that prefer playing like in wooded areas, hilly areas, lots of difficult obstacles like that. But when you get into types of areas like that, it's for the more advanced paintballers. You're not going to get those that are just trying to get into it or those just trying to have a fun weekend. That's more on an advanced level. And so, yeah, a more flat area with the built-in bunkers, the big spools, tires, things to hide behind. That's more ideal to reach a more broad range of players.
One question I have is you see recreational opportunities like this sometimes ebb and flow. What happens if we allow you to bring in tires and bunkers and build all these obstacles, and then it kind of falls into disrepair and nobody uses it any longer? Who's going to clean that up?
As the ones that have proposed it, we have kind of taken that responsibility on ourselves to where if you feel that it's not getting utilized to its full advantage and it's not working out, we will bring the stuff in and we would take it out as well.
I wondered about the area straight south of the ball field complex. It's fairly flat in there. There was a lot of dirt moved when the fish pond was being built.
On the south side of the fish pond?
It would be the north side of the fish pond,
Okay.
south
So, yeah,
of the
we looked at
ball
that area as
field.
well.
Is it not large enough, or?
It's large enough, yes. The one thing that we did look into was there is a house on the
Just
east side
across
of
the
the
canal.
ravine.
Okay.
And we were
Mhm.
thinking it'd want to be closer to the ravine, however, there is that structure on the other side. But
Trying
that's
to
still the
avoid
same
that.
type of potential as next to the event center as well.
Yeah.
so just speaking for myself, I don't think we're opposed to this. It's just finding the right spot and kind of for what your intentions are. So,
And I think it might be wise for the county to even help make a spot work for you, even if you have to have the road crew go out with some of our machinery to fix a spot for you that's a little more inaccessible for someone to shoot some of the facilities that.
Sure.
Well, and that's fine. We didn't necessarily know that was an option. We were just going with
Yeah.
what's available
And
that we
ready.
saw without construction, so to speak.
And admittedly, we got pretty excited about the grass itself. And we understand the need to cut costs and not water that anymore. But so that's the original reason we went with that particular spot. We did look up there by the horse
Yeah, on the south side of the
Corrals.
fish pond, the north side of the fish pond.
up there, because it's
Yeah.
pretty wide. It's not around a lot of structures. So that was definitely the other one that we were looking at, and we're completely open to other suggestions, especially if we've got the resources that we could move some dirt around and make it a little more easy to access.
How big of a field are you looking for?
The ideal space would probably be about 150 by 200 feet.
150 by 200?
That's the ideal space for the field itself, yes.
Okay. The other question that I had as I was looking through this is restroom facilities. It doesn't matter which area we're talking about, whether it's the grass area or out by the king crawlers or over by the fish pond. None of those areas have a restroom facility close. Is there? I think there would be a need to have at least an outhouse available for use. And who would pay for that?
That would be the question. It wasn't one of our main concerns, because again, we were picturing it as a lot of the public spaces that we have. You know, if you go to the softball fields, the restrooms aren't always open, but you still have people going there to just play and mess around. So that's kind of how we were comparing it. So we did also talk about if we needed to bring in, you know, a porta potty of sorts, that might be a possibility if it was really required, but it was kind of low on our concerns.
Well, I think I'm okay with the idea, and maybe just look at it through the lens of maybe it would be better for the county in general to even do a little work to help get something ready so that we're in the best location for not creating because I can tell you what probably will happen. If the event center gets shot, it'll be shut down.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
and everybody that comes there are not all going to be responsible people. So, you know, somebody could just start lobbing paintballs at a structure, and then we would end up having to clean it up, and that wouldn't happen very many times, and then end up we'd just have to change. So placing it in an area far enough away that they could shoot any direction and it wouldn't
And that would be better. I think people
problem.
would be more comfortable playing if they weren't concerned about accidentally shooting outside of the area there. So that's completely fine with us.
Commissioners, one other thing to think about is we'd need to decide what kind of signage we're going to require, if there needs to be age restrictions out there. So signage and warnings. Probably also need to check with our insurance to make sure that if we have such a facility, it doesn't affect our rates or cause us to lose any kind of coverage. So I think those are two things we need to look at as well, because we do have special events coverage and fairgrounds activities coverage. So we'd want to make sure that anything that happens out there is covered by it, or if we knew it's specifically exempted, then we could weigh that as we'd have to consider that too, because they may tell us, well, we're not going to cover that, anything that happens out there from a paintball injury, and then we'd have to really weigh whether waiver form or signage that was put up out there is sufficient to protect us from suit if we were sued for establishing such an area. So I think we need to look into that as well.
And if I could also just mention that we are really in depth with the paintball community throughout the state. And so the possibility of having other teams, you know, it would all be amateur, of course, but coming from out of the area to come down and compete, if we get the right kind of bunkers, the right kind of setting, could really be a great thing. And that is our intention, is to expand and advertise and really just bring more people in to enjoy it.
It's possible that if we reach out that way, the tourism dollars could help pay for some signage.
Yeah.
So, well, I think for me, I would even make the motion that we sort of approve this with the idea we'd check insurance and also go look for a better place and see what it would take if it takes a little equipment work to fix a spot. That might be in our best interest to spend that money so we don't have to run you off.
That would be terrific.
I'll second that motion.
Okay,
Fantastic.
motion is second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Why don't you just coordinate through Tony and Scott, and I'd be happy to bring Daniel out,
You can find a
kind of look
spot.
around to find a spot there, so.
Absolutely.
Terrific. I'll follow up then. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your
You bet.
time and for
Thank
the
you, guys.
approval. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Item 3 on our list is review and possible adoption or denial of ordinance 536, a change to the Carbon County zoning map from RR-2.5 to R-1-20K, located at 380 West, 1000 South for Casey and Brittany Johnson.
I might could speak to this one. This lot that is owned by the Johnsons had a small piece of their property on the north end that was never included in the beginning in the zone description, the lot description. And so it's just an effort to clean that lot up to make the zoning on their lot apply to the whole lot, not just part of it. So this is really just a cleanup thing on the part of planning and zoning's efforts. So I would recommend that we approve that. I'd make that motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Item number 4 is review and possible adoption or denial of ordinance 537, a change to the Carbon County zoning map from R-2.5 to RR-1, located near 900 East, 3250 South for David Black. Commissioner Jensen?
Yeah, I'll describe that one as well. This is I believe about a 14-acre parcel of ground that Mr. Black wanted to subdivide, and the current zoning would require a 2.5-acre lot size, and he wanted to reduce that from 2.5 acre to 1 acre, which raised some concerns. And as he went before the Planning Commission to seek approval for the zone change, questions arose, and the Planning Commission denied his request. And since then, he has met with Todd and Curtis again, and the concerns that the Planning Commission had, as he weighs those at this point, he is willing to back off from wanting to have the small 1-acre lots. And so the need for this request has gone away. And so it would be my recommendation in a motion that we deny the request that he has originally put in to change the zoning from R2.5 to R-1 to deny that request.
I'll second that motion.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Number 5, consideration and possible approval of a memorandum of agreement with the Utah Department of Human Services for funding for beds at the Youth Service Center. Do we have anybody here to speak to that? or-
Commissioners, it just looks like they're going to pay for, I guess it just says that the Carbon County is, let's see, providing beds at the juvenile detention center, basically. Or let's see. Well, we're not providing them. They're making them available. Let me see here. Oh, this is on behalf of Four Corners, I believe. But Four Corners is going to, will provide treatment to those or support to those juveniles that might use 1 to 3 beds at the, over at the juvenile detention center. So what Four Corners will do is ensure that a youth is not actively suicidal before admitting them, and will provide therapeutic crisis management, assessment based on strengths and psychiatric needs of the youth, medication intervention, and wellness recovery and discharge planning. So, so that they will have to provide support, I guess, if youth are brought in to use these beds. I'm guessing these beds are different than for youth who are incarcerated.
I think that's correct. The idea is that there's a, even at present right now, if there's children that are in danger and they feel like they need a safe place, they can go out there and stay. And they do have a separate area for some to be that are not not associated nor mixed with those that are in the detention center. So
And Four Corners will provide that
I think so.
support. So,
And
as usual, the state tries to make these contracts as opaque and vague as they can, but I think that is what they're getting at here. I agree with you.
And it sounds like it's available if there's a bed available, and if they have staff to take
Right.
care of any needs. If those two things are not in place, then they're not obligated to take anybody.
I think that's right. Mhm.
And it's only up to 2 weeks or 14 days, so it's not long-term.
Right.
Looks like there should maybe be a change to the agreement period there. Doesn't make sense. Number 2.
What's the problem with that?
It says the agreement period is for 1 year commencing February
Oh,
1,
for 1 year,
2020
huh?
and ending January 31, 2025, which is
That's a long,
approximately 5 years.
Huh?
that's a long year.
It was, I don't know if the intent was to be 1 year or 5 years. Does anybody know?
I don't.
I don't.
I didn't catch that before. Maybe we could get that clarified. You could approve it subject to clarification on that. I think Karen Dolan could provide us that information.
It looks like Jeannie Wilson might have the
Yeah.
be the contact there.
Well, I'll make a motion to approve subject to clarification on the date, the
I'll second.
1-year time frame.
I'll second that.
Okay, a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Who would follow up on that, you think?
I can follow up on it.
Or
Or I don't know who else would have.
I can call Jeannie, and that's my assignment. So I'll talk to Jeannie and make sure the dates, and then
You just scratch out the either scratch in a new year or scratch out the number of years
Right,
and initial it. I think that would be sufficient.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, item number 6, consideration and possible approval of a contract with the Administrative Office of the Courts for bailiff services.
So Commissioners, annually, the Administrative Office of the Courts provides some funding to us to pay for handling security over there at the courthouse. And it looks like, I believe these amounts are the same as last year. We had asked for more last year and asked them to, and they said, well, ask for it this year. And I know state generally is trying not to increase amounts now at this point. So looks like we're going to get about the same amount as we did last year, but otherwise it's the same agreement we've approved every year, that we agree to provide necessary security over at the courthouse, at the district courthouse.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to get any more. I'll make a motion to approve the contract with the Administrative Office of the Courts for bailiff services.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Item number 7, consideration and possible approval of an interlocal agreement with Salt Lake County for provisions of COVID-19 equipment. Mr. Needles, did you want to address that?
It's Mr. COVID.
Yes, so one of the shortcomings we have not been able to get has been non-touch thermometers. Salt Lake County was able to get a bunch of those, and they were offering to provide those to us, and they have already provided them to us, but they just would like an agreement saying something goes wrong with them, essentially, that it's not their fault.
That's right. They want you to indemnify them in case somebody gets I don't know what could arise from it. Yeah.
So that's what it is. They've helped us out with some PPE that they were able to get that we weren't, and they sent us the contract.
And these are no charge.
Yep, no charge. They, the nice thing is they're gonna apply for the exact same funding that we would apply for, so they're gonna be covered by the FEMA grant most likely, and so there's no reason in them billing us to in turn apply for the same grant that they can apply for, so no cost to us.
Okay.
I don't have any questions. I'll make the motion that we enter into this interlocal agreement with Salt Lake County for provision of the COVID-19 equipment.
I'll second that.
Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Item number 8, training on Open and Public Meetings Act.
Okay, Commissioners.
Christian, before you get into that, we probably need to get our yearly elected officials, what's it called?
Conflict of interest
Conflict of
declaration.
interest declarations done as well. So just to put it on the radar.
Yeah, okay, very good.
Don't we have to do those yearly, annually?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, we're supposed to do those and keep those on file with the commission secretary, so.
Okay. Maybe Jeannie.
I've got a form that I can give to everybody.
Okay, and then if you want to
Pass
just get with all the elected officials and round them up, that would be great.
Well, Commissioners, usually it seems like we do an Open and Public Meetings Act training on the last commission meeting of the year, like on December 23rd when everybody wants to go home, or the night before Thanksgiving break starts. So it'll be miserable tonight, but just remember in December that you'll be glad you're not doing it that night. So I'll try and go kind of quick on this. We're required to do this every year. The public policy declaration for the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act is that the legislature intends for the state and political subdivisions to take their actions openly and conduct their deliberations openly. And the Supreme Court has said that courts are to strictly construe exceptions to this declared policy. So in other words, the presumption is when making a decision or deciding whether your meeting is to be open and public, you start with the premise that, yes, what we're going to do, we have to do it in an open and public meeting. And then if an exception exists, you can go by that exception, but you have to presume that whatever you do is going to be done publicly. So let's just hit some of these highlights. Notice of there were very, very few changes to the Open and Public Meetings Act during this last legislative session. The only one that I saw was that there's now an opioid fatality board, a state board that they've created, and that board can review information in a closed session. So that doesn't affect you. So really there aren't any changes to this that affect you that are new this year. Okay, so with respect to notice of meetings, the main things to remember are that we are to give 24 hours public notice of each meeting. Jeannie's really conscious of that, and we've done that really well. So unless there's an emergency, we send notice to the newspaper and to the radio stations at least 24 hours prior to the meeting. That doesn't mean we have to publish the agenda. It just means we send them the agenda and inform them of what our meeting is. So it's not a publication requirement, it's just a notice requirement. In an emergency, you can call in a meeting with fewer than 24 hours notice, but you have to give the best practicable notice of time and place of the meeting. So if there's an emergency, we've had some fire emergencies a few years ago where we had to do an emergency declaration, and we called that meeting with just a few hours time, but we still tried to give notice to everybody of what we're doing. Importantly, an agenda must provide reasonable specificity to notify the public as to the topics. So when you're thinking of how you want to frame the agenda item, it's real easy for us to use a lot of state government acronyms, right? Well, we're going to talk about an MOU with the CJC and the DHS. Well, if I'm Joe Blow on the street, that doesn't tell me anything. So we need to think that it's the language in the agenda isn't for our benefit, it's for the public's benefit. We're to be reasonably specific to notify the public as to the topics. I see this violated by state agencies. Everybody wants to make their agenda short and quick. But my thought is if you're not being specific enough for the public to know what you're talking about, you're not really complying with that. So Jeannie's done a really good job at making sure we are giving real specific notice to the public, and we need to continue that. It's possible you might go into closed session during a meeting. You don't have to say on the agenda that you're going into a closed session in order to go to a closed session. You can, if your discussion on an item leads you into a topic where you do need to go into a closed session, you can make a motion to go into a closed session even though the agenda didn't say you might be doing that. No action can be taken on a topic that's raised by the public in a meeting, although the chairman can entertain discussion on that topic, but no action can be taken on it. Okay, I've listed just a few things that our procurement code says has to go onto the agenda. Contracts that exceed the amount of $5,000, any purchase anticipated to exceed $15,000 through sealed bids, any procurement by request for proposal that exceeds $15,000, an interlocal agreement like we did here tonight, even though it's just for handing over thermometers, we put that on just as a policy. The nice thing is when we've got something on an agenda, it's easy to track it and figure out when we passed it, and if we need to find a copy, we can use the agenda to help us know who was involved and when it took place. As a matter of course, if I'm ever presented with a contract and the contract has a requirement in there that we have to do something other than purchase a product, such as indemnify somebody or add them to our insurance or hold them harmless for something, as a matter of policy, I've always said, well, it might be under $5,000, but if we're going to agree that we're going to indemnify them, which means we're going to cover their legal fees and expenses if they get sued because of what we do, That's a big obligation on our part. So those kinds of contracts I still like to put on the agenda for you to consider, to decide, because I think you ought to be able to weigh the decision. Yeah, this is only $2,000, but they're trying to limit our access to their insurance coverage, for example. So a lot of engineering contracts will say, we're going to do this job and we're only in charge of $1,500, but if we do it wrong, even though the effects of what we do may cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, the fact that you're only paying $2,000, well, you can only get $2,000 of our insurance coverage. So if they try and put those kind of provisions on there, I think those are things you ought to look at a meeting, and I always ask that whoever brings that kind of contract to put it on the agenda. Okay, what is a meeting for the purposes of the Open and Public Meetings Act? It requires all of the following elements. The convening, and convening has a special statutory definition of a quorum of a public body to discuss, receive comments about, or act upon a matter over which the public body has jurisdiction or advisory power. Sometimes the public will say, well, I don't want them to take any action. I just want to come talk to the commissioners, and I just want to hear their thoughts about something, or I just want to tell them something. Well, if they're wanting you to discuss something and not necessarily take any action, it's still a meeting if you're going to convene and talk about it. Now, if it's something that you don't have jurisdiction over or advisory power over, then it's not a meeting for purposes of the meeting. And it also doesn't matter what you title the meeting. The statute uses the example of a workshop or an executive session, because those were, I think in the 70s and 80s and 90s, a closed session was kind of informally referred to as an executive session. I think even when Casey first came on board, closed sessions were referred to as executive sessions. Well, it doesn't matter what you call it. Nowadays, we hear a lot about retreats. We're going to do a retreat. But if what you're talking about is something that you can formulate policy on, or you have jurisdiction over, it still is a meeting and needs to be done openly and publicly. And then convening, the definition of convening means the calling together of a public body by a person authorized to do so for the express purpose of discussing or acting upon a subject over which that public body has jurisdiction or advisory power. So if you call a meeting together, just be aware that you getting together may constitute convening, even if you're not really, if your intent wasn't to take any action. So here's a couple of hypothetical situations that you can to look at it as to whether you think or not they're public meetings. Let's say the State Alcoholic Beverage Control Board wants to meet to tell you new procedures that they've recently passed and approved for obtaining a restaurant liquor license. And they want you to know this in case you're approached for information by local restaurants, or in case you as the public, you as Carbon County at your event center want to obtain a liquor license. Now maybe you don't have anything planned where you're going to need to get one. Because this board does not approve those licenses or give any recommendation on what guidelines the State Alcoholic Beverage Control Board would follow, I don't think that would be a public meeting if you had them come and make a private presentation to you. Because you can't advise them on what they're not asking you to give them any advice. They're saying, we already passed these regulations. It's a done deal. We're just telling you what they are. And you don't have any input on what their recommendations are. You don't advise them. They're just giving you pure information over which you have no authority. So I would say that kind of a meeting would not be a public meeting. It would not be the convening of a public meeting. Let's say the BLM comes and says, hey, we think we need to do a new resource management plan for the Price area. Now, you don't have jurisdiction over their RMPs, but we have those cooperative agreements that say that they will take our input when they make these RMPs. And in that case, I would say that if they're coming to talk to you about it, that is something that you have advisory power over. And so because you have that advisory power, it's going to be, they're going to start, we go back to the legislative authority thing. The legislature presumes you're going to take all your decisions and have your discussions openly. So if you're having a meeting over which you can give advice on any kind of subject in which you formally have the right to make a recommendation, I think that's a meeting. Now, you might say, well, we didn't call the meeting, or they asked us to come to their office. If you're going over there as a quorum, or even at their invitation, or they call here to set up the meeting, I think if a judge were to look at it, he's not really going to look as much at who called the meeting, who actually invited you to have it. He's going to look, I think, primarily at, is this something you have advisory power over or jurisdiction over? And are you giving comments and making comments and receiving something over which you have some power? I think a judge is going to presume then that's a public meeting. So don't, and I probably said contradictory things in the past, but I think that's kind of, I think you got to think of the presumption and then not worry about so much who's calling the meeting, but what's going to happen at the meeting. Of course, I'm always happy to look at those on an individual basis with you. Okay, so a meeting is not a meeting if no public funds are appropriated for expenditure and the public body is convened solely for the discussion or implementation of administrative or operational matters for which no formal action by the public body is required or that would not come before the public body for discussion or action. So we're really talking executive functions, which they define here as administrative or operational. It's the old classic executive versus legislative, and you hold both legislative and executive powers. So because you have both of those, you kind of have to delineate what role you're functioning in. So here's a list of some, on this next page I put a list of what are executive decisions and what are legislative decisions. Let's say you decide you're going to provide weekly plowing of Nuck Woodard Road up in Clear Creek. And you're going to plow that road and blade it every week because it's so important. That may be an executive decision, but it's really going to affect the public because that's going to be, this is now kind of a new and improved travel way. So that might be a legislative decision. Or let's say you think you need to authorize a survey for a certain part of the county or a new GIS map. Those might be legislative decisions, but deciding which county employee or which county department is going to do that would clearly be just an operational or administrative decision that you wouldn't have to convene together for. Likewise, I think if you're using budgeted money for a budgeted expense and you decide that now we're going to do it in June as opposed to May, I think deciding when to do that is like, say you got money for chip sealing and you say, well, gosh, it's April, it's hot, we're going to have an unprecedented heat wave in April, let's chip seal now. You've already budgeted the money for it. I think that deciding when you're going to do that would be an executive decision. Appropriating money, though, for something that you hadn't budgeted is something that you ought to make that decision in a commission meeting. I've got a number of other things here. I think if you enact a policy that affects the county or public at large, and a lot of our ordinances and resolutions do that, then that's a legislative decision. But if you're enacting a policy that affects only county employees, if there's a percentage increase because of inflation to the per diem amount, lunch expense amount you give an employee when they're traveling, that might not need to come here. That might just be an operational decision you could make if you've got money in the budget for it. Or if you're going to say, we're going to turn off the lights on this schedule in these different hallways in the building, I would say that's an operational decision that affects only the employees, not the public at large. If you issue a declaration of support or opposition to a public policy matter, say a new administration decides that they want to add to wilderness within the federal lands in Carbon County, you want to oppose that. I think you need to bring that, if you're going to make a declaration of public policy, that probably needs to be done in a commission meeting. Deciding to purchase or sell property has to be done in a commission meeting, but decisions on how to maintain that property, whether you're going to get rid of the grass or whether you're going to, how often you're going to water it, that's executive. So I've got a couple others there, but let's move on to closed meetings. Your closed meeting, you can't have a closed meeting or go into a closed session unless you have a specific agenda item. So sometimes boards, and I haven't seen this happen here for a very long time, but sometimes boards that don't do it often will just put on their agenda closed session. Well, you can't do that. You have to say what the purpose is of the discussion. But then, once you're in the meeting, so you only vote to go into a closed, you can only go into a closed session after making a vote, and that vote requires 2/3 of the members to approve it. So you always have to do a roll call vote. That should always be noted in the minutes as, rather than saying the commission voted to go into closed session, you'd want to say all 3 commission members, or Tony and Casey voted to go into closed session. So it should be a roll call vote. And you can only go into a closed session for statutory reasons. And some of those reasons are to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation, to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, and to discuss the purchase, sale, exchange, lease of real property, and the deployment of security personnel, devices, or systems, and investigative proceedings regarding allegations of criminal misconduct. We have to record those closed sessions unless they pertain to security systems or the character and competence of an individual. If we're just going to talk about the character or competence of an individual or a security system or a security procedure, that does not have to be recorded as long as one of you makes an affidavit after the meeting that that's what you talked about. If somebody challenges the legality of the reason why you went into a closed session, and it turns out we didn't go into a closed session for a proper reason, the statute says the judge is to make public the portion of the meeting that was improperly closed. So the judge will take that recording, and who knows how he'll want it published, but we don't want to find out. So there is a case law exemption from the Open Meetings Act. Certain deliberations or decision-making decisions during a judicial process, when you're acting in a quasi-judicial function, may be held in private and are exempt from the requirements of the Act, according to the case of Dairy Product Services, Inc. versus City of Wellsville. So you don't have to record those, and they're considered not part of a public meeting. So sometimes where you're considering a request for proposals, if you're considering a request for proposals, I consider that to be a quasi-judicial function where you're weighing them and deciding who you're going to choose. The courts say you don't have to do that in a closed session. You don't have to do it openly, and you can do it behind closed doors, and it's not considered a closed session that needs to be recorded. Where you're deciding, let's say you have an appeal from the Career Services Council decision for discipline on a county employee, that would be a case where you could go into be exercising a quasi-judicial function and making a decision that is not really, you're acting as judges as opposed to an executive or a legislature. And in those conditions, you're not subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. With respect to meeting minutes, I think Lori takes better notes than anybody that I can imagine, so she does such a great job. So this is kind of boilerplate, and she checks all of these boxes. They have to have the date, time, and place of the meeting, the names of the members present and absent, the substance of all matters proposed, discussed, or decided, a record of each vote taken, the name of each person recognized who provided public comments or testimony to you, and any other information that a member of the public body may request. So if somebody comes in and talks, Tony, you could say, Lori, I want you to take note that this person speaking today came in wearing a mask and sunglasses. It says you can do that. You can request additional information to be put in there. So you might want to ask, you could say he brought in a handout or provided written materials, that kind of thing.
Okay.
We have to keep a recording of all of portions of the open meeting, and that recording has to be labeled or identified with a date, time, and place of meeting. I think we're probably storing all of these electronically, and I think that's fine as long as we can access them by the date, then we're fine. Minutes are subject to the Grandma Act, even pending minutes that have been produced by Lori. Those could be subject to Grandma, but I think there's some provisions in there too that the Grandma Act gives us some ability to limit certain pending minutes. But pending minutes or approved minutes, which we're more likely to see a request for, they are to be made available. They're to be posted to the state website within 3 days, and a copy of any public materials are to be posted to the state website. I think this is the provision you guys educated me about last year that I wasn't aware of. So we're doing that because you're the ones who figured that out without my help. So they're available statewide. And an audio recording, if somebody comes in and wants an audio recording of our meeting, why they can come in and ask for that, has to be made available 3 days after the meeting. I think our meetings are on YouTube. Can you go back and watch old meetings on YouTube?
Yeah.
So we're well covered there.
The audio's also saved.
Oh, great. Perfect. Great. And the public, if the public wants to come in and stick a microphone right here, they can do it as long as it, quote, does not interfere with the conduct of the meeting. So if they create a tripping hazard, we have the right to say, back your microphone off. But anybody can come in and record the meeting. Sometimes you might need to make a site visit as part of a meeting. You don't need to be recorded. You don't need to record that site visit if you're simply taking notes. A couple of miscellaneous items. A person disrupting a meeting may be removed if the orderly conduct of the meeting is seriously compromised. Any action that you take in this meeting in violation of the Open and Public Meetings Act is voidable by a court. So conceivably a court could void a contract that's entered into if it's done improperly with respect to the Open and Public Meetings Act, and if there's an intentional violation of the closed meeting portion of the act, then you can be prosecuted up to a Class B misdemeanor. So there it is. Any questions? Anything you think I ought to be aware of? I know we talk about this quite often, but...
Is there a test that follows that we have to pass a certain percentage on? Or?
Yeah, well, no, but I do have a certificate that I'm going to have each one of you sign. And Lori, it would be great if you put in the minutes that I had the commissioners sign a certificate. And I'm going to give it to them right now. So I think that's all I have.
I'd just like to thank Christian and your staff. You keep us in line and answer questions before we get in trouble, so thank you.
Thanks.
There's always a situation that makes it tricky to figure out. But I think we're pretty good on keeping the public informed on what we're doing here. If anything, I think we err on the side of putting more stuff on the agenda than maybe we need to, but I think that's okay. I think the public can trace and track what you're doing very well.
Absolutely. Anything
Thanks,
else?
Christian.
Thanks, Christian.
I can't wait for the other 10 or 15 of these that I have for all the other boards.
I know.
I'll make the motion we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thanks.